Hi there, I'm Philip Ideson, the host of Art of Procurement. Today is a short but a very important podcast. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, like I'm sure most of you, have felt helpless while watching all the scenes unfold on TV. But as procurement and supply chain professionals, the skills that we have are in demand right now in securing and moving goods that the Ukrainian people require. The biggest challenge is how do we harness all the goodwill and the desire of procurement professionals to help? And that definitely isn't an easy question to answer right now. And I think it's certainly a moving target. And so I invited onto the podcast today a good friend of the show, Sammeli Sammalkorpi. Sammeli is, in his day job, the CEO and co-founder of Sievo, and Sievo is based in Helsinki in Finland. I received an email from Sammeli early last week as he was starting to explore ways in bringing together the global procurement community to support the needs of Ukraine. Subsequently, a small group of professionals, including Lance Younger, another former AOP guest, launched a hub called Procure4Peace.org to act as that central place to coordinate all the kind of activities and bring together the procurement community. And so I invited Sammeli onto the podcast to share what procurement professionals can do right now. And I started by asking him just to share a little bit more information about Procure4Peace.
Let me start by telling a story. Last weekend, I realized that through my connections in Finnish procurement, supply chain, logistics network, I was able to quite quickly help the Ukrainians in Finland to establish a logistics corridor from Finland to Poland and further to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And upon reflection on that, I realized that procurement is actually super well positioned to help Ukraine right now. And the reason being that there's a lot of, let's say, donation money going into Ukraine right now. So the money is not an issue.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, a lot of needs in Ukraine for different kind of medical supplies and so forth. But the challenge is that the Ukrainians don't have the time. They have war to fight. And also quite often there's a lot of, let's say, spontaneous NGO organizations in Ukraine that don't have the time, they don't have the procurement expertise, but they have the money and the need.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, there's a large number of global procurement people who have kind of capabilities, who have more time than Ukrainians, and who are really willing and keen to help. So that's the whole idea behind the Procure4Peace, is that we try to kind of connect the Ukrainians who have the needs and knowledge of the local situation with the global procurement community that's willing to help,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to create a community and a platform and solution and resources that can basically combine and connect, bridge the Ukrainians and global procurement community.
And so it's really bringing everybody together so that because, as you see, there's so many different entities all trying to help, but in a way that's uncoordinated right now.
Yeah.
So do you see kind of coordination as being one of the big goals of bringing together, kind of a central place of figuring out, okay, so how can we help collectively rather than on an individual basis?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I do feel I know part of the answer, but at the same time, I think sort of right now as we record this podcast, we are week into the war, so I think it's very much an emerging situation still. Kind of, I think there's two layers on how the help is taking place. There's sort of the coordinated layer where sort of the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian military, the large Ukrainian hospitals and so forth are having a healthy dialogue within, let's say, the large global pharma companies with the other governments and so forth. And there's, let's say, established structures which were kind of created and designed months and years ago.
Yeah.
To kind of, I don't believe an individual or an organization like Procure4Peace can really be helpful there. Probably the best way we can help is stay out of the way,
Right.
and not to interfere what's happening there. At the same time, and I think this is quite specific to Ukraine. In the Ukraine, there's a lot of these spontaneous NGO organizations that need help, and right now they are reaching out to help, let's say, very much on one-on-one communication basis. Somebody knows somebody and sends a telegram or WhatsApp or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
and then the help is created. So on that level, what we are trying to do is kind of helping these, let's say, smaller NGOs. We are trying to move the communication from, let's say, one-on-one communication to kind of a platform. I wouldn't say it's a coordinated, and I think there's a different time horizons. Right now, there's a new war in the place. I don't think there's a lot of time for coordination that will come later on. So it's more kind of providing platform kind of on a many-to-many basis where the collaboration can take place.
Yeah.
Having said that, Procure4Peace is not only such platform initiative community. Procure4Peace didn't exist 10 days ago, and
Right.
there's several other ones. So I think one thing we also need to do, and that's, I guess, the goal for the next weekend, is try to figure out really the landscape, what sort of different initiatives there are, to make sure that we also kind of create a bit of coordination so that we decide who focuses on which area of the dilemma. Somebody can focus on, for example, supplier kind of identification. Somebody else can focus on the logistics piece and so forth, so that we can decide that if there's these 10 almost startup sort of platforms,
Yeah.
how do we collaborate between each other?
Yeah, so that everybody's not getting in each other's way,
Yeah,
essentially,
exactly.
in an attempt to do the right thing,
Yeah.
but then just creating more complexity in the system, if you will.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly, and I think that is one reflection really, is that sort of there's a lot of people outside Ukraine that really want to help and want to
Right.
kind of donate and give anything. One example shared in our webinar today was that the Ukrainians were saying that, okay, for example, people donate a lot of clothes, and the clothes are taken to the Ukrainian border in trucks and vans, and that creates a huge queues at the Ukrainian border, which means that the stuff that's actually needed there, like medicine and so forth, doesn't go through.
Mhm.
So I think that's one thing that all of us outside Ukraine that want to help need to also take a step back and think: is my help really helpful, or
Yes.
neutral, or vice versa? And am I really doing this to make an impact, or am I just doing something to feel good as that I'm doing something?
Yeah.
And that's also, I must say, a reflection I had on our project as well. Sort of how do we make sure that we are just not just creating noise and longer queues on the border? How can we really be helpful?
Yeah, and one of the things that I definitely took away, so I was at the webinar. We're recording this on Friday, and you had a webinar on Friday with a number of professionals,
Mm.
procurement professionals from Ukraine, talking about some of their needs and
Yeah.
and kind of what they need in the moment.
Mm.
Um, that at the moment there is so much unknown.
Mm.
So all this is kind of formulating in real time of how
Yeah.
we can truly help and
Yeah.
what's going to be the best way to do so. And so at the moment, it's more kind of harnessing awareness
Mm.
that if you do want to help, like you may not be able to go and jump in and do something, but being a part of a community where when it's kind of clearer what help you can offer,
Yeah.
that's going to be the central place to understand what it can be, where your help is needed, where you can have the biggest impact.
Mm.
And that's kind of what I see at the moment is more bringing everyone together. So at least there's a common place for us to have those conversations.
Exactly, and I think kind of the way I see it evolving is, okay, if we can kind of connect the Ukrainian side with the sort of non-Ukrainian side, and there's just to give it a very, it's sort of a stupid example, but I think it kind of explains that there's this connection problem. On the Ukrainian side, they have certain platforms. For example, they require a Telegram account for you to
Mhm.
join those platforms. How many, let's say, EU procurement professionals have Telegram account?
Right.
Not many.
Yep.
And how do we go over these sort of connection challenges and very concrete sort of problems out there?
hmm And for now, you're kind of harnessing this through LinkedIn, right? And through
Yeah.
at least the communication through a LinkedIn group. So could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think anyone who's interested, that would definitely be the first place to go to start to get connected.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to community, at least right now, the place is Procure4Peace. The four is number four. It's
Yeah.
Procure number 4Peace. There's a LinkedIn group over there where we have a bunch of, let's say, Ukrainian procurement people defining the needs, and then we have, let's say, a bunch of procurement professionals from outside Ukraine sort of providing help. So that's definitely kind of right now where we are kind of building the community. Is that the end game solution? I don't know, but that's
Right.
the time to market really
hmm
is essential here. And LinkedIn group is one such, and we also identified it's an forum where both the, say, non-Ukrainian and Ukrainian procurement professionals are present, so kind of we can bring them quickly there. So that's sort of the communal aspect at the moment. And then there's also Procure4Peace.org, where we are kind of building more static resources on what is helpful, but also linking to other resources and domains and platforms. We are really trying to help from procurement perspective. That's the domain where we have the community, we have the audience, we believe we can be helpful. But of course, there's other programs focused on humanitarian aid, focusing on, let's say, helping asylum seekers, focusing on logistics piece. So we are also providing links to them. So this is really kind of the procurement piece of the problem.
Yeah, and within that LinkedIn group, even there was an example in the webinar of something that happened yesterday, so Thursday, around request for consultative help, like questions from the field in Ukraine of how do I address a particular topic, whether it's customs or legal or whatever it may be. And so just being there, and that's where kind of encouraging the Ukrainian professionals to post any ad hoc needs that they may have that can then be answered by folks who are experts outside of Ukraine, and just a way of initially kind of bringing together that conversation.
And I think it's a great example, because sort of I think that really proves the point. There's people that may have very specific questions. This was about custom clearance from Germany to somewhere else. Then there was another sort of question around sort of financial service providers in Poland. And that knowledge definitely exists in the procurement community. But instead of trying to do that, let's say, through 5 emails, and each email chain taking 5 hours, we lose the day. You post it, somebody sees and picks it up, and then we solve it in 2 hours instead of 24 hours. And that may be the difference of actually making sure that the help arrives on time in place. So I think that's the time aspect is super critical here.
Yeah, and just kind of the last point I wanted to bring from the webinar is there was a talk of kind of what's needed, and I think it's still very ad hoc, of course, because it's still, we're a kind of a week into this and kind of forming how we can help more collectively. But there was talk about provisions of goods and services, so helping with sourcing with things like medical supplies. There was a discussion around steel in the webinar today. There's things that are needed in the field that folks not necessarily know where to go to get them. But then it's more kind of the support, and ultimately it'll be around manpower. You said that folks in the Ukraine don't have the time to be able to go and source the products, the services that they need. Finding the right solutions and the tools that we can harness to bring all this together, and then that consultative help, like that ad hoc. I just need to an answer, and I need it in the next hour of what to do with this. Those are kind of the 3 ways that just to keep your eye on. Once you're in that LinkedIn group, that's probably the best way of helping, at least through what you're setting up through Procure4Peace right now is probably the best thing to do, and then await kind of further maturity of kind of the bringing all this together, so that it's, as we figure out how we can help more collectively as opposed to on an ad hoc basis.
Absolutely, yeah. And I kind of, as you mentioned, the kind of time component is really the key here. Quite often, sometimes the information could be found through Googling and so forth, but if that takes 3 hours, and if you can connect an expert who can really kind of answer the topic with few messages or short phone call or whatnot, it maybe makes the difference.
Yeah. All right, Sammeli, I want to leave it there unless there's anything else that you want to just share with the audience that we haven't touched on today. I think that we're all just wanting to bring as much exposure as possible to how we as a community can come together and help. So if there's anything that I've missed, please share it.
Yeah, and kind of there's of course 2 time horizons. We need to think how to kind of build a scalability support mechanism on mid to long term. We don't know how long the situation will drag on. At the same time, there's also very time sensitive need now and here. So if anybody listening sort of is an procurement expert, please join the Procure4Peace LinkedIn group. Again, it's Procure4Peace LinkedIn group. And especially if you happen to have any knowledge or connection in medical supplies, pharma, protective equipment, stuff like that, that's where the strongest needs is right now. Situation may change. It may be that next week it's more about food and so forth. So the dynamics of this is super quick.
Okay, Perfect. Well, what I'm going to do is I'll put links in the show notes for today's episode as well. So that's going to be artofprocurement.com/podcast. You'll see this episode, and I'll include the link to the LinkedIn group, but also the procure4peace.org website as well, which are ways that anyone can go at any time, kind of see all the updates of ways that they can get involved. Sammeli, I want to thank you for kind of pulling together the community to do as much as we possibly can to help everybody in Ukraine, and for just jumping on the call as well and sharing that with our community at Art of Procurement. We want to get involved and help as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, thanks, Phil, and thanks for kind of also kind of letting me to do this interview, because I do believe that anybody listening to the podcast as well is potentially probably a procurement expert and capable to contribute to the cause.